A beacon of hope for many across Russia and around the world. He spent his life fighting corruption and standing up for what he believed in. His enemies thought that they could silence his voice. They were wrong. It continues to inspire and it continues to galvanize people across the world. In this house, just days after his murder, we welcomed his brave wife, Yulia Navalnaya. Yulia called on all of us to continue the fight for freedom and justice. And this House remembers him and what he stood for. So I'll open the floor now to the group speakers, starting with the EPP group, Standra Kalniete, 2 minutes.
Dear colleagues, you are not allowed to give up. This is the message Alexey Navalny left for the Russian opposition after his death. He knew that the repressions would only become more barbaric. He was not mistaken. The Kremlin consolidates its power through measures that resemble the scale of an Orwellian dystopia. The number of political prisoners is rising. Even Navalny's lawyers and colleagues are now imprisoned in high-security prisons. For now, unlike Stalin, Putin doesn't use the judicial system to execute the oppositioners. He handles it more discreetly by poisoning, bombing or throwing opponents out of windows. The Russian opposition has been weakened to a critical level. Therefore, it's our duty to support civil society activists in Russia and also the opposition working outside of it. Political repressions serve Putin to secure his expansionist policies and hybrid operations against neighboring countries. He is determined to continue the war of aggression against Ukraine. The Kremlin is heavily involved in the elections of Georgia, Moldova and European countries. Regular attacks are taking place on Europe's critical infrastructure. Paid Kremlin agents operate within European institutions of power. Russia is and will remain the greatest threat to European security. Europe must finally understand that Ukraine's victory is a matter of European security and future. Our support for Ukraine is insufficient both in terms of sanctions and military aid to secure its victory. The EU and NATO countries must support Ukraine more speedily and decisively. Ukraine's victory will limit Russia's military capabilities. Ukraine's victory will be the death toll for Putin's regime and hopefully the beginning of Russia's path to normalization rather than further chaos. Thank you.
Now for the S&D group, Andreas Schiede, 3 minutes.
President, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I think that many of us are feeling the same thing that we felt a year ago with the horrible news about the assassination of Navalny. Unfortunately, we were not surprised because so many opposition activists have experienced the same fate. Those who are criminalized by the Kremlin live dangerously. Litvinenko and many others are examples of that. And when in Russia, whoever calls out for democracy lives dangerously, is accused of being a foreign agent, is put in a penal colony, their families are threatened. The human rights situation is horrible, and we've seen this, of course, with Russia's exit from the European Convention of Human Rights as well, and the criminalization of Memorial and the shutting it down of that organization as well. Numerous court procedures, prosecution against those who supported Navalny, against his aides as well. All independent media has now been either closed down or has been heavily censored. And all of this shows that Putin is an enemy of democracy. And the first sacrificial victim are people, the people themselves in Russia. Alexey Navalny's wife, Yulia, was here in the European Parliament, in the plenary, and she said the following: "My husband will never see what the beautiful Russia of the future will look like." but we must see it. And there are still people in Russia that see a better future, people who are fighting courageously for the future, for a democratic future in Russia, people who are ready to give everything up for democracy, for rule of law. They're ready to risk everything. And these people require our solidarity, our support, and really our calling out for human rights, for democracy in Russia, in Europe, for everywhere in the world, and to fight against all enemies of democracy.
Romain Dionnet, 1 minute.
Dans ses mémoires,
in his memoirs, Navalny says the biggest error in the West is to mix up the Russian state and the Russian people. Navalny fought against the Kremlin and corruption. His enemies saw him as a puppet of the outside world. Certain liberal circles excluded him because they thought he was too liberal. He had become a orthodox. He talked about the central doctrine of modern Russia. He talked about, unlike Tolstoy, he believed in the role of the individual in history rather than speeding up things and creating radical change. What do we learn from Alexey Navalny? Russia can take a direction which is Russia is seeing Europe as hostile, but another direction is possible, and not one where one is opposed against the other.
Nicola Procaccini.
For the ECR, Nicola Procaccini.
grazie Presidente.
Thank you, President.
The rest of my life in prison and die here. There will be no one to say goodbye to. These were the final words of Alexey Navalny spoken from a prison in the Arctic Circle where he had been confined. Sadly, he was right. Those words appear in a book that encapsulates Navalny's choice, with a simple yet powerful title, Patriot. His wife, Yulia, said that sharing his story will inspire others to stand up for what is right and never lose sight of the values that truly matter. In this chamber, you all know me. I'm a conservative, a man of the right. I deeply love my nation, and that is why I hold profound admiration for this Russian martyr. And it's also why I despise those who, while calling themselves patriots, undermine his legacy and disregard his sacrifice. Personally, I can hardly imagine the courage it takes for a man who, after miraculously surviving yet another assassination attempt, kisses his wife and children goodbye and boards a plane to return to his homeland, facing a cruel and murderous regime head-on. What is worth it? The fact that we are here today speaking about him is a proof that it was. I believe that the courage of a few can inspire the many, and that sooner or later Russia will be free once more. The great Russian writer Tolstoy once wrote, "Just as one torch ignites another, setting thousands aflame, so too does one heart ignite another, setting thousands of hearts ablaze." Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Procaccini. Now Bernard Guetta for the Renew Europe Group.
Highly respected Mr. Navalny, you did not die in vain. In a deliberate sacrifice, you had returned to hand yourself over to Vladimir Putin, your assassin, to tell the world that all Russians, and far from it, did not support this war of aggression or the dictatorship exercised by the sword and by theft. Many thought you were mad at the time because Russia, they said, does not like freedom, but the yoke, that of the Tsars, Stalin or Putin. Many still think so, but they are wrong. Because why does Putin so brutally repress dissenting voices? Why does he not decree general mobilization and call on Mr. Kim's auxiliaries? It's quite simply that he fears the reactions of his people, a people who don't want to die for imperial fantasies and who see prices rising every day, interest rates soaring, and public services increasingly deteriorating. The Kremlin's mercenaries are advancing, they say. Yes, that's true. But how many meters a week? Because he is not winning this war, Vladimir Putin is losing it. Because it is not losing it, Ukraine is winning it. Yes, you were right, dear Alexey Anatolyevich. Right not to believe in the invincibility of this little Stalin, and right to want to offer yourself to your compatriots as a positive hero. But what you could not have imagined is that a president of the United States would today proclaim his friendship for Vladimir Putin and sing his praises. You, who lived freedom so much, could never have believed that there would be an American president who would haggle over his aid to Ukraine with such greed and lack of awareness of the danger. We could not have imagined it either, but we're still on Ukraine's side, and we increasingly admire in you a new Sakharov.
To please be quiet while some of our colleagues are still speaking in the current debate. Sergei Lagodinsky, 1.5 minutes.
Ich habe Alexei getroffen.
I met Alexei one day before he traveled back from Germany to Russia, and frequently I think about him. Frequently I've asked, what would Alexei himself say if he were here? He would speak much more and with greater depth about these particular issues. He would fight against Putin, against the war without any fear. He said, I have no fear, and you ought also have no fear. He would speak about people. He would speak about people that have been killed, tortured by the regime. His Alexei Liptsev, Koptsev, Sergunin, these people, only because of having defended Navalny, they are now incarcerated. He would spoken about Alexei Gorinov, who 7 years tortured now in a penal colony. Zhenya Berkovich, Svetlana Bekerchuk, 7 years because of a harmless theater piece. Numerous others for 7 years in prison for having been active in Alexei's NGO. When you don't forget all of these people who are against war, who are against Putin, and who are sitting now in prison and are dying from cancer, Elena Bistrova, Maxim Birno, Litov, Zhukov, Laputin, all of these people have been courageous enough. They are an indication of hope. They are Alexei Navalny. A week ago, Stroikin, who has fought against the war, fell out of a window, died mysteriously. So indeed, we have to be strong. We have to be strong, and we have to be aware of how strong we are. We're simply not aware of it, but we have to reveal that strength. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam President. About 1 year ago, Alexei Navalny died in a Russian penal colony. He was killed because he was a prominent opposition person and critic of the regime. The corrupt dictatorship of Vladimir Putin was criticized by him. I can't understand all the stages in the political life of Navalny, but I recognize his political courage, which for many in Russia was an inspiration and remains so. But this debate here today should be the cause to think of all those who are currently in Russian penal colonies and are suffering a similar fate as Navalny, because they're courageous and they're prepared to suffer, and they've criticized the Putin regime. We should would step in for the freedom of political prisoners and conscientious objectors to the war. Thank you very much.
Volgin, 1 minute.
It is a shame how the West makes use of Navalny's death. The people who took 2 years to investigate the explosion of the Nord Stream needed only a couple of minutes to organize an investigation, to stage a trial, and to identify the culprit. They had no evidence at all, but they ruled Putin had killed Navalny. Let's see facts. First of all, the Russian army was advancing in Ukraine at that time and captured Avdiivka. Secondly, it was again at that time that Putin gave an interview to Tucker Carlson. That was a great success of Kremlin. Thirdly, presidential elections were upcoming and Putin won overwhelmingly. That's what happened. Well, against that backdrop, why would the Russian leadership need to kill Navalny? Why would they kill someone who had no significance? No normal person will believe, but normal thinking is far beyond this place.